Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're all doing well and keeping safe on this Thursday. In today's episode, going to be looking at Chelsea's very bloated squad and why that could be an issue for Frank Lampard moving forward. Also, Kai Havertz's brilliant individual performance for Germany last night and how that could positively impact Chelsea moving forward. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content, because it helps out the channel as well. So in recent days, we've been reacting to the closing of the transfer window, the main sort of deadline day. Of course, there are still some deadlines in terms of EFL loans, potential loans that could still happen between clubs, but specifically Chelsea, the big business in terms of bringing in players especially is done. It's done now. So looking now at this squad, the very bloated squad, the players on deadline day that didn't move, that could have moved, and how that could prove to be an issue, at least for the short term until the next window of Chelsea struggling to shift a lot of unwanted players. Now, I think two pieces I want to reference that I suggest you go and read for different reasons. So Matt Law wrote this piece specifically about Antonio Rudiger and Fikayo Tomori reassessing their Chelsea futures in January after potential moves broke down. Of course, Rudiger could have gone to Roma. Roma seemed to be the most obvious option on deadline day. Spurs were linked. Other clubs were linked to PSG, Napoli, and of course, Fikayo Tomori rejecting a loan to West Ham at the final hour, basically with little time to go. And apparently, as Matt Law reports in his piece, him and his family didn't have a lot of time to decide on this move, and that was very much connected to Rudiger, because if Rudiger was going to stay, Chelsea didn't want 5 centre-backs, and that reopened the door for a Tomori loan, which of course did not happen. And then moving on to this piece from Liam Toomey in Athletic, which is more of a general view at the situation. Lampard's bloated Chelsea squad will test his man management skills. I absolutely agree there. So both of these pieces I definitely suggest you go and read if you want sort of a more individual sort of detailed look at both Rudiger and Tomori situation, but a more general view of Liam Toomey. Both of those links will be in the description box below. Go and read them because they did spark sort of my interest in talking about it today. I think it is an issue, and my concern is firstly with those centre-backs having 5 centre-backs. I mean, just looking at the current situation, if Frank Lampard sticks, which I think he will at least for the short term, with a 4-2-3-1, 2 centre-backs being selected in the starting 11, which I expect at the moment ahead of the queue of everyone else is going to be Thiago Silva and Kurt Zouma based on the last performance against Crystal Palace. You think about a bench, and you think about usually how a bench is sort of constructed in terms of the type of players, positions you put on that bench. Usually you only put 1 centre-back on a bench. So that would mean that 2 centre-backs are going to miss out. And that could both be Fikayo Tomori and, of course, Antonio Rudiger. Andreas Christensen could miss out currently. And that's an issue because usually if you have 4 centre-backs, usually one of those are going to miss out. I know sometimes it's different, say if you have an injury crisis, but usually a coach only puts 1 centre-back on the bench. So that's going to be interesting moving forward because having those senior players, especially senior players. So if you think in the next matchday squad, for instance, where Kurt Zouma and Thiago Silva start the game, Fikayo Tomori's on the bench, then you have definitely one senior player in Antonio Rudiger, but also a player coming into the prime of their career now in Andreas Christensen, not in the squad at all. That could cause issue with harmony within the squad, certain players feeling very isolated and outcast. Rudiger has very much gave the intent and the impression that he wants to stay and fight for his place. I spoke about this after deadline day that I think it's going to be very difficult for any of these fringe players to break in. You're basically relying on a real drop in form, and Frank Lampard reverts to what he did with the defence last season, which I don't want to see, in constantly shifting the back 4 over and over again. If we have a type of performance like against Crystal Palace consistently, I cannot see that happening. And that's what we hope as fans, right? We hope Chelsea are more solid at the back, which isn't good news for fringe players. And that's across the team, really. If the team starts performing very consistently and very well in certain positions, as we saw in small glimpses last year, because Frank Lampard didn't do it a lot and the team wasn't very consistent last year, but when a back 4 or just a starting 11 worked, Frank would stick with it, whether that was a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 or a 3-4-3. He'd at least try it for the next game. And I think that could be the difficulty for some of these fringe players. I also referred to us being knocked out the League Cup. That could be a great place for players to play. And you're sort of looking at maybe a Champions League dead rubber group game at the end that could help some of these players feature in if Frank reverts to a back 3. But I always say when we're going to a back 3, you expect Dave, if he's fit and on form, will be one of those centre-backs. So still, that's the difficulty for those centre-backs at the moment. So you still sort of would have the same situation, even though he would move to a back 3. So I think that's the concern there in terms of the centre-backs, and both of their futures, for different reasons, they both need to be playing football at the moment. Antonio Rudiger, in the prime of his career, has had injury problems, coming closer to the end of his career. Of course, not exactly at the twilight of his career yet. Still, a player of his age should be getting first-team football wherever that is, and he'll be desperate to get that football, especially in terms of getting into the Germany squad, which he's a consistent member of course, playing for Germany last night, hoping to get into that Euro squad. Also, Fikayo Tomori wants to get more minutes for his development, but also potentially getting into the Euro squad next summer. So I think for both of these cases, I understand why reassessing the situation in January is important, and I don't think both of them will leave. I still can't see a situation where Chelsea leave themselves with only 3 centre-backs for the remaining part of the season. But it's just based on who eventually goes out. I think it would still be more likely Antonio Rudiger, because I think he'll likely be the player more isolated, or at least the player more of an outcast. I think Tomori, based on what I've been reading, Frank Lampard really rating for Fikayo Tomori, really trusting in him. I think he will likely either feature on the bench more regularly or get more first-team football than Rudiger can between now and January. But that'll be an interesting situation. And the other 2 players I want to speak about are both left-backs, Emerson and Marcus Alonso. It was sort of always a flip of the coin for me throughout the summer of who would go. It seemed for a long time it was going to be Emerson. Then it seemed that Marcus Alonso, mostly because of that fallout after the West Brom game, Frank Lampard apparently going off at Marcus Alonso for his actions at half-time after being substituted after that dreadful first-half display, going on the team coach rather than sitting in the stands and supporting his team. And you felt like that could have been the end for Marcus Alonso, but nothing materialised on deadline day. That's the biggest concern for me, because you wonder Frank Lampard's relationship with Marcus Alonso, and Marcus Alonso acting like that as a senior player. I spoke about this with Jay McIntosh last week, and it's concerning to me, a player of his age, of his pedigree, a player who has been a senior figure in our team, who has been mostly a positive player for Chelsea. I think you have to say he's been involved in some big wins for Chelsea, and he scored some big goals. I think overall he's liked by Chelsea fans, but the concern is him not playing now because of Ben Chilwell, Emerson even getting in front of him in squads now. How is he going to behave now moving forward? Is he going to feel more like an outcast? Is he going to kick up a fuss? Especially if results sour in certain points, and that could be difficult for Frank Lampard. I just wonder Marcus Alonso. I think that'll be another player who I would look out for to see moving in January, because him not moving this summer, or either of them not moving this summer, was a shock. But it does seem to be very much linked to Marina Granovskaya's very tough negotiating, and I think she absolutely deserves so much credit for this window. I think a lot of her great work in terms of selling, especially of getting amazing fees for the likes of Alvaro Morata recently, have helped sort of get the money and investment to sign so many big players this summer for Chelsea and really recruit well. But I think the problem Chelsea have had in this particular market of it being more of a buyer's than a seller's market for unwanted players is sort of looking to get the highest fee for that player. And Chelsea struggling to shift out players that really aren't in the first team. We've seen this with Michy Batshuayi and Timothy Bakayoko. They've had to be loan moves just for now. Davide Zappacosta not getting the permanent fee. I do wonder in, say, a year's time, or at least next summer, whether the market you'd hope would be in a better state, so clubs would be more willing to spend on players, because there are some decent players there that could potentially help clubs out. I think Michy Batshuayi, if he has a decent season for Palace, potentially Palace could become the potential permanent suitor for him. But I wonder, looking forward, how uncertain times are with football at the moment, fans not being back in stadiums. Is this going to be a consistent problem for Chelsea? I do think on the flip side, and some of you guys have commented on videos before of mine recently saying that having a big squad is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's too big a squad. I mean, having a big squad is good. I think it's the most valuable it's ever been this season, and I think it will benefit Chelsea with the rapid rate of games. But you still have that issue where, as I stated earlier, you're going to have 2 players out, especially 2 centre-backs most likely out for most weeks in the matchday squad. How is that going to impact the harmony, especially if it's a popular character in the dressing room like Antonio Rudiger or Andreas Christensen, or Fikayo Tomori himself wants to get more minutes for his development? It's a delicate situation, and I think it will test Frank Lampard's ability as a man manager. I think overall in his time at the club, I think that's been one of his strengths. I think dealing with situations, difficult situations. I think the way he dealt with Christian Pulisic early on in his career, sort of letting him get into the first team and maybe having doubts early on, but then bringing him into the first team at the right time and him flourishing under Lampard. I think the way he dealt with some of the younger players last year, I think he really managed some of them well. I think the way he managed the Kepa situation was, I think, a positive, because based on what Matt Law has said recently in terms of the way Frank Lampard dealt with Kepa, not making him feel that isolated within the first team squad, even though, of course, he was dropping him for some games, I think is a good thing. I just wonder with outbursts at Marcus Alonso, which I think was right, absolutely right, based on Marcus Alonso's actions. You just wonder, with the amount of players he has to deal with, a lot of senior players, could that cause an issue? I'm not sure. Please let me know in the comments below on this situation moving forward. And lastly, before I wrap up, just want to talk about Kai Havertz. Got 2 assists for Germany last night. I suggest you go and watch that game. They did draw 3-3. I think the pick of the bunch is the second assist for Kai, because it was so smart, it was so intelligent, and it just shows the level of thinking that Kai has in terms of, you see this with so many brilliant players that can affect games and really change the tide of a game in key moments, and just looking like he's ahead of the rest, playing the game at a different speed, a different level of thinking and focus. 2 touches and he sets up, I think it was Germany's second or third goal of the night, and it was just brilliant. It absolutely was for Kai and his level of thinking. And you just wonder moving forward for Chelsea, him playing that number 10 role. He played more of a number 8 role yesterday in sort of a 3-5-2, but looking at Chelsea in a 4-2-3-1, him being that number 10, you can already see him sort of dominating that position, and why he can become sort of the focal creator of this team. Chelsea have been doing an interesting thing this season. They've been releasing sort of a stat sort of filled article after the game, going through the numbers, and this was of course with the Crystal Palace game, and they released Kai Havertz heat map for the game, and also talked about here Havertz came out on top of 4 aerial duels, more than anyone, and also recorded 3 clearances, a figure bettered only by Thiago Silva, and also the German supplied 3 key passes, the same number as Ben Chilwell, who of course had an amazing man of the match performance for Chelsea. But just looking at this heat map, you can see even though he starts as a number 10, the sort of the freedom he has in movement, the versatility of movement, how he picks up different pockets of space. So it's not just generally the number 10. I mean, how you'd sort of set up a number 10 in that formation. If you look at the heat map, I mean, he's not really in that area a lot of the time. He's shifting over to the left, he's shifting over to the right, he's coming deep as well. And his intelligence and movement to attack pockets of space, I think, is really impressive. And there are even moments towards the end of Chelsea's victory over Crystal Palace where you saw that how deadly he can be. I just wonder, and a lot of people have been saying this about the players now being available, and mostly having Christian Pulisic and Hakim Ziyech hopefully fit after the international break, of looking at that front 4 and what it could be. Because certain people have looked at that front 4 and said you have Pulisic on the left, you have Kai in the middle of a 3 behind the striker, you have Ziyech likely on the right, and then you have Timo Werner up top rather than playing on the left now whilst Christian Pulisic was injured. And I think that's going to be really exciting in terms of the interlinking and fluidity of movement. I think that's going to be a really exciting option. I won't be stunned if that sort of front 4 starts games pretty frequently, because I think it could be a very deadly combination. And I think, just as you saw last night, Kai's sort of speed of thinking linking up potentially with a Timo Werner, a Ziyech, especially a Pulisic who loves to come into central areas, and really his anticipation for goals is so good, and movement, I think it bodes so well for Chelsea. And although we haven't been exhilarating so far in attack, I think you have to give it time. And now we've got such influential players, especially Pulisic back in the first team, I think it's going to be very exciting moving forward how Frank Lampard assembles that attacking team. And I think it's all going to be revolving around Kai Havertz, because as you saw last night for Germany, as we've seen in brief glimpses for Chelsea already, when Kai gets that space, when he can be involved in a game, he can be absolutely deadly. So please let me know your opinions on Kai Havertz. What do you think Frank Lampard's attack is going to look like moving forward with Christian Pulisic and Hakim Ziyech back fit in the squad? Please let me know in the comments below. But that is it for this episode of Let's Talk Chelsea. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch it. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonofChelsea, and I'll see you again.